Now, concerns raised about the pace of South Africa's rollout program have been articulated in various quarters. One expert says while the number of vaccinations has been rising slowly, it is far below the number of vaccine doses that are available in the country. Professor Nicoli Nattrass from the School of Economics at the University of Cape Town says the rollout is far too slow. She joins us now to further unpack this. Good to have you with us this afternoon, Professor Nattrass. Now, talk to us about the rollout process. You are of the view that it is far too slow.
I mean, there's different criticisms one can make of the vaccination program, one that it started far too late. But let's just talk about where we are right now and how much more we can and should be doing at this moment. So at this moment, we have about 1.5 million doses unused of vaccine. And we're getting every week 640,000 more. And last week, we only vaccinated 320,000 people. In other words, we're vaccinating at half the pace of the amount of vaccine that's being flown into the country every week, and we've got 1.5 million doses to spare. So under those conditions, we really need to be ramping up the numbers of people that we're vaccinating now, especially since we're going to, in the future, get even greater supplies of vaccine, especially of the J&J. So that's been my major concern, is that the pace now is far too slow, given how many vaccine doses we have and how often they're being flown into the country.
Now, Professor, if you could put this into perspective for us, because there are some quarters, and perhaps this conversation and this argument can be made when you're looking at perhaps a continental approach to the vaccination process, because there are some quarters who are saying that our main concern is really the availability of vaccines more than everything else, to such an extent that the first and the second doses have been made, the gap between those two has actually been extended in some circumstances.
Well, like I just said, I don't think that problem applies to us right now, because right now we've got plenty of vaccine, and the government has at this moment secured very steady supplies of it. So if we're talking continental-wide, South Africa was very slow to start. And other countries that have done much better in terms of getting a greater percentage of people vaccinated, including Morocco and Zimbabwe, these countries have actually used the Chinese vaccine and the Russian vaccine as well. They've got a much more diverse set of vaccines available. We've focused on the J&J vaccine and on the Pfizer vaccine. Now, you could say that was a bit slow, but right now that isn't a problem. We can actually vaccinate, according to the government's plan, with J&J and Pfizer. The point is we just need to get ourselves onto a war footing. I mean, we're not really vaccinating as fast as we possibly could. We could be rolling out more on the weekends, for example.
And what would you say, Professor, are the impediments to us being able to use up the 1.5 million doses that we do have?
Well, this is a bit of a puzzle. This is why I got sort of intrigued by this problem. I think the impediments are our own system. We've got this incredibly complicated EVDS registration system, which is actually unnecessary. It was trying to manage queues. So the idea was, you'd register and then you get the SMS and then it says, well, wait for your appointment, and then people are waiting, and then they're waiting to be sent to the right clinic. And what's happened now from my going around to a few of these clinics is that many people aren't going to their allotted clinics, or the clinics are sitting with hardly anybody there. For example, I went to Brown's Farm, which is a low-income area in Cape Town, and there was actually nobody waiting in the queue there at all. So either they haven't allocated enough people to those queues, or the older people there are waiting to see. They're not ready to vaccinate themselves right now. So under those conditions, I think the government should really be thinking, okay, who else can we vaccinate? Obviously, keep the elderly coming in, keep giving them preference and put them at the front of the queues. But maybe we should also be vaccinating our teachers over the weekend, getting our essential workers that seem to have fallen off the map. maybe asking people aged 50 plus in some areas where the elderly aren't coming in to get vaccinated. Have more walk-ins. I mean, I just think that we've been so kind of caught up by our system that we're rolling it out at far too slow a pace, and the government itself realizes the pace is far too slow. You know, we've got more vaccine, as I said, coming in faster than we're using it.
This phase really is targeted at the over 60s.
That's right.
Percentage-wise, are you aware of how many have actually heeded the call and have been vaccinated? Is it perhaps time to start, as you say, widening the net?
I think it really is. And I think that a lot of the elderly in some places, in rural areas, are probably not yet being called, and maybe they don't want to drive into town. Obviously, we need to get as many elderly as possible, but I see no reason why you couldn't have a more open queue system where the minute somebody over 60 arrives, they just get shunted to the front of the queue. No one minds. You know, we're very good at standing in queues, actually, and all the accounts that people have published about what it was like getting vaccinated say how cheerful and kind everybody is. So, you know, I think just focusing only on the older people, especially when we're missing our essential workers. The original plan said we were going to be doing the elderly and essential workers, also people with comorbidities, and yet somehow because the system can't deal with that. We seem to be only doing it by age, and I think that's a huge failure on the part of government. Previously, during the Sasonki trial, you could register if you were, over 60 and a healthcare worker. Now it's only over 60. So any healthcare worker who didn't get registered and vaccinated in the first phase is not even getting onto the electronic system. So, I think we need to open up that system, or at least just allow people to get vaccinated and then put their details onto the system later. Because all you really need is the batch number of the vaccine and their ID book number. That's all you need. You don't need to go through this complicated system.
The reasoning behind the electronic system was really not only to keep order, but to make sure that the requisite number of vaccine doses were actually available for the number of people that would come. Are you saying that this is no longer an issue? Because obviously different stations have various allocations of vaccines, so it would be important to find out how many people will actually be coming through.
That's right, and I think that our planners initially really didn't want long queues, and I understand that. But then, they'd send the vaccines to places like, I went to Cricks, I went to Bryan's Farm, and if the people aren't arriving, then clearly, the planners were assuming everybody who got an SMS was going to arrive that day. Well, they haven't. And then the government in the Western Cape at least starts to tolerate the so-called walk-ins. As long as you're over 60 and you've registered, you can just walk in. And that was a really good move. And other clinics are sort of helping elderly people who haven't quite registered. The library is helping them to assist the registration and then giving them a little piece of paper saying, we've registered these people, here's their name. And then the clinics are registering them. So a lot of people on the ground are doing a lot of creative workarounds. They're not being just stuck by the government system. But I do think that that's one of our blockages, that the planners thought that people would be more easily planned, but people aren't. And there's a lot of people out there who need to be vaccinated, and I think we should just accommodate them, particularly teachers, actually.
So as we wrap up our conversation this afternoon, Professor, what would be the ideal rollout plan for the vaccinations to make sure that the doses that we do have are adequately used and to make sure that we vaccinate as many South Africans as we need to?
Look, you obviously do need to keep a careful eye on the supply and demand here. But the reason why I'm saying open it up is that we've got such a lot of supply right now. I mean, we've got 1.5 million doses in hand, and every week we're getting more, double what we vaccinated last week. So it's not really a question of allocating and dribbling out kind of scarce doses. What we need to do right now is actually expand access.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for your time and your insight this afternoon. Very much appreciated, advocating there for a system that will work. A system that will make sure that all the vaccine doses that we have are actually utilized and that walk-ins are also allowed in various institutions. Professor Nicoli Nattrass there from the University of Cape Town.